Good morning. Page 405. And then began his free, no poisoned years, because Ch14 couldn't risk settling down or staying too long in one place. That same year, several months later, he ran into his own camp godfather in the city park in Fruns. But that was in passing. It was a festive occasion with music and girls, and the godfather failed to recognize him. He had to leave the job he had found. The senior bookkeeper questioned him and guessed the urgent reasons, but turned out to be a Solovki veteran himself. He had moved on. At first, he would not take the risk of seeking out his family, but afterward he worked out how to. He wrote to a woman cousin in Ufa, "Where are Lena and the children? Guess who is writing you? Don't tell her yet." And the return address was some kind of Averbakh station, a man named Ch14. And the cousins replied, "The children are lost, and your wife is in Novosibirsk." Then Ch14 asked her to go to Novosibirsk to tell his wife, but only face-to-face, that her husband had reappeared and wanted to send money. The cousin went, and now his own wife wrote to him. She was in a psychiatric hospital. Her passport had been lost. She had to get through 3 months of forced labor, and she couldn't receive money sent to general delivery. His heart leaped. He had to go to her, and her husband sent her an insane telegram. "Meet me on train such and such, car such and such." The heart is ever defenseless against emotion, but is not, praise God, immune to premonitions. These premonitions so played on his mind while he was en route that he got off the train 2 stations before Novosibirsk and hitched a ride in a passing automobile. Having checked his luggage at the baggage room, he went recklessly to his wife's address. He knocked. The door was open and there was no one in the house. The first coincidence was an ill omen. The landlord had spent the whole day on guard in order to warn him about the ambush waiting for him, but at the very moment he had gone out to get water. He went in. His wife was not there. On a cot lay a Chekist covered with his coat and snoring loudly. The second coincidence was a benign omen. Ch14 fled. At that moment he was hailed by the landlord, a fellow acquaintance from the KVJD, not yet arrested. Apparently his son-in-law was a security man and had brought the telegram home himself and shaken it in front of Ch14's wife. "This rat is yours. He's running right into our hands of his own accord." They had gone to the train and hadn't found him. The second security man had left for a moment, and this other had lain down to rest. Nonetheless, Ch14 managed to get a hold of his wife, and they went several stations down the line in a car and got on a train to Uzbekistan. In Leningrad, they registered their marriage again. That is, without divorcing Ch14. She is now married Ch14. But they could not make up their minds to live together. They sent inquiries in every direction in her name and attempted to find the children, but in vain. And that was the sort of separated and tormented life they led before the war. In 1941, Ch14 was called up for military service and became a radio operator in the 61st Cavalry Division. On one occasion, he was careless and called cigarettes and matches by their Chinese names as a joke. In what normal city could something like that arouse suspicion? Merely because a man knew some foreign words. In our country it did, and the stoolies were right there, and Political Commissar Sokolov, security officer of the 219th Cavalry Division, was questioning him within the hour. "Where did you learn Chinese?" "Ch14. Only those 2 words." "Did you serve in the KVJD?" Service abroad is immediately viewed as a grave sin. The security officer also sent the stoolies on him, but they found nothing. So just to be certain, he arrested him under 5810 anyway, because he did not believe in the Sovietform Bureau communiques because he had said that the Germans had more equipment, as if everyone had not seen that with their own eyes. Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Court-martial, death sentence, and Ch14 was so fed up with life in the fatherland, he didn't even petition for mercy. But the state needed working hands, so he got 10 years plus 5 muzzled. Once again, he was back in his native home. He served, with time off for work, 9 years. And then there was another chance encounter in camp. Another Zek, NF, called him over to a far corner of the upper bunks, and there asked him quietly, "What's your name?" "Avtanom Vasilich." "And what province were you born in?" "Tumen." "What district?" What village, Soviet?" Ch14 Shupin gave all the correct answers and heard, "You're lying. I worked on the same locomotive as Avtanom Chupin for 5 years. I know him well as I know myself." "Was it you who swiped his documents one day in May 1936? Now that was a kind of invisible underwater anchor a fugitive can rip open his belly on." What novelist would be believed if he were to think of such an encounter like that? By the time Ch14 again wanted to survive and warmly shook the good man's hand when the latter said, "Don't be afraid, I won't go to the Godfather. I'm not a bastard." And thus it was that Ch14 served out his second term as Chupan. But to his misfortune, his last camp was a top-secret one of that group of atomic projects: Moscow 10, Turas 38, Sverdlovsk 39, and Chelyabinsk 40. They were engaged in separating uranium ores, and construction was proceeding according to Kurchatov's plans, and the construction chief was Lieutenant General Ch14, who was subordinate only to Stalin and Beria. Every quarter, the Zeks had to renew their pledges of non-disclosure, but this was not the real trouble. The real trouble was that those released were not allowed to return home. The released prisoners were sent off in a large group in September 1950 to the Kolyma. Only there were they relieved of convoy and declared to be a particularly dangerous special contingent. They were dangerous because they had helped make the atomic bomb. How can one really keep up with all this and describe it? Chapters and chapters are necessary. There were tens of thousands of similar ones scattered all over the Kolyma. Look through the Constitution. Look through the codes. What do they say about special contingents? Well, at least he could send for his wife now. She came to him at the Aldyak goldfields, and from there they began to seek their sons again. But the replies were all negative. No, not listed here. Stalin kicked the bucket, and the old folks moved from the Kolyma to the Caucasus to warm their bones. Things eased up, though slowly, and in 1959 their son Victor, a Kiev lathe operator, decided to get rid of his hateful new name and declared himself to be the son of the enemy of the people, Ch14. And a year later his parents found him, and now the father's problem was to regain the name Ch14 himself. Thrice rehabilitated, by then he could no longer be charged for the escape. He came out into the open. His fingerprints were sent to Moscow for comparison. The old man got back his peace of mind only when all three of them were issued passports in the name of Ch14. His wife, his daughter-in-law also became Ch14. But a few years later he wrote me that he already regretted having found Victor. He abuses his father as a criminal and the source of all his misfortunes, and waves away the rehabilitation certificates, a fake, and his elder son, Gennady, has never been found. The Ch14 in this image here. In case you're not watching. From all the cases I've reported on, it is clear that even successful escape couldn't bring freedom, but merely a life constantly oppressed and threatened. That was very well understood by some of the fugitives, but those who in the camps had succeeded in breaking away from the fatherland politically by those too who lived by the ignorant, illiterate principle of just living. And it was not altogether rare to find among the fugitives some, in case of failure, they had their answer ready. We escaped in order to go to the Central Committee and ask to have our cases reopened, whose purpose was to escape the West, and who considered only that kind of escape complete. These escapes are the hardest of all to talk about. Those who did not make it are in the damp earth. Those who were caught again are silent. Those who left in some cases surfaced in the West, but in some cases, because of someone left behind, are still silent. There were rumors that in Chukotka, some sects captured a plane and 7 of them flew to Alaska, but what I think is they merely tried to seize one and their plan failed. All of these cases will continue to languish in secrecy for a long time to come, and grow old and lose their relevance, just like this manuscript, and like everything truthful written in our country. Let's not let it grow old and lose its relevance, right? That's why we're reading it. Because it does matter. Who am I to tell him that this wasn't his experience? Who is anyone? Here is one such case, and once again, human memory has failed to preserve the name of the heroic figure. He was from Odessa, and in his civilian profession, he was a mechanical engineer, and in the army a captain. He finished the war in Austria and served in the occupation forces in Vienna. He was arrested in 1948 on the basis of a denunciation and was charged and sentenced under Article 58 to 25 years, as was the norm by then. He sent off to Siberia to a camp located 180 miles from Tashkent. In other words, far from the main line of the Trans-Siberian. He very soon began to weaken at logging, but he retained the will to fight for life and his memory of Vienna. And from there, he succeeded in escaping to Vienna. Incredible. Their logging sector was bordered by a cut, which was kept under surveillance from small watchtowers. On the chosen day, he had a bread ration with him at work. He felled a thickly branched pine across the cut, and beneath its branches crawled to its top. It wasn't tall enough to span the entire cut, but continuing to crawl, he made it across successfully. He took an axe with him. It was in summer. He had made his way through the taiga in wind-fallen woods, and the walking was very difficult, but on the other hand, he didn't run into anyone for a whole month. Tying up the sleeves and collar of his shirt, he caught fish in it and ate them raw. He collected cedar nuts, mushrooms, and berries. Half dead, he nonetheless managed to get to the Trans-Siberian trunk line and happily went to sleep in a haystack. He was roused by voices. They were picking up the hay with pitchforks and had already found him. He was fagged out and prepared neither to run away nor to put up a fight, and he said, "Well, all right, take me, turn me in. I'm a fugitive." There stood a railroad truck walker and his wife, and the truck walker said to him, "Oh, come on now. We are Russians. Just sit there and don't give yourself away." They went off, but the fugitive didn't believe them. They were, after all, Soviet people. They had to denounce him. He crawled off into the woods. From the edge of the forest, he watched and saw the truck walker return, bringing clothing and food. That evening, the fugitive walked along the track, and at the forest whistle stop boarded a freight train, jumping off before morning and going into the forest for the day. Night after night he moved on in this way, and when he grew stronger, he even got off at every stop, hiding in the foliage or walking on ahead, getting in front of the train, and then jumping on it again while it was moving. That way he risked dozens of times losing an arm, a leg, his head. That was how he paid for the few easy glides of the pen of the stoolie who had turned him in. But on one occasion, just before reaching the Urals, he changed his rule and went to sleep on a flat car carrying logs. He was awakened by a kick and a lantern shining in his eyes and a demand for documents. Just a minute, he rose, and with one blow knocked the guard off the car and jumped off the other side, and onto the head of another guard. He knocked that one off his feet and managed to make his getaway under nearby trains. Outside the station, he boarded a train while it was moving. He decided to bypass Sverdlovsk by walking around it, and in the suburbs plundered a trade stall, got clothes for himself, put 3 suits on, and collected some food. At one station, he sold one of the suits and bought a ticket from Chelyabinsk to Orsk in Central Asia. No, he knew where he was going, to Vienna, but he had to cover his tracks and let the pursuit die down. A Turkmen, chairman of a collective farm, met him at the bazaar, took him to work on the farm even though he had no documents, and his hands justified his calling as a mechanical engineer. He repaired all the farm machinery, and after several months he took his pay and went to Krasnovodsk, near the border. After the train left Mary, a patrol came along, checking documents. At this point, our mechanical engineer went out on the car platform, opened the door, hung out the toilet window where they could not see him from inside because of the frosted glass, and only the toe of one shoe remained to support him and enable him to get back on the step. The patrol failed to notice the toe of the shoe in the corner of the door frame and went on into the next car. And so the awful moment passed. Having crossed the Caspian Sea without incident, the fugitive got on a train going from Baku to Shepatovka, and from there he made for the Carpathians. With great caution, he started to make his way across the mountainous border at a remote, steep, forested place, but still the border guards caught him. How much he had to sacrifice, to suffer, to invent and to endure, since his Siberian camp, since that first felled pine tree, and right at the very end, everything was wrecked in one instant. And his strength left him, just as it had back there in the haystack at Dashet, and he couldn't resist any longer, nor lie, and in a final fury he merely shouted, "All right, take me, you executioners. Take me, you are stronger. Who are you? A fugitive from the camps. Take me." But the border guards acted rather strangely. They blindfolded him and took him to a dugout, and there unbound his eyes and questioned him again, and suddenly it emerged that they were friends. Banderists, Ukrainian nationalist partisans. Bye-bye. Educated readers will frown and wave their hands at me. Well, you certainly picked some character. He regarded Banderists as friends. A real rotten fruit, that one. Well, all I can do is spread my hands myself. That's how he was. That's how he was when he escaped. That's what the camps had made. That's what the camps had made of him. These camp people, as I can tell you, live on the basis of the swinish principle, existence determines consciousness, but by what the newspapers say. To camp inmates, friends are those with whom they were tormented in camp, and enemies are those who put the dogs on their trail. Lack of conscientiousness. And so they embraced. The Banderists still had their own border crossing at the time, and they gently led him across. And so there he was in Vienna again, but this time in the American zone, and submissive still to that enticing materialist principle, and not forgetting for one moment his bloody death camp. He no longer sought work as a mechanical engineer, but instead went to the American authorities to unburden his soul, and he began to work for them in some capacity. But it is a human trait to relax one's vigilance as soon as the danger has passed. He planned to send some money to his parents in Odessa, and to do that he had to exchange dollars from Soviet money. Some Jewish businessman invited him to his apartment, in the Soviet zone of Vienna to make the deal. People used to shuttle back and forth all the time, paying no attention to the zones. Should have never gone into the Soviet zone. He went, however, and was captured at the apartment of the money changer. Now this is a very Russian story of how superhuman feats are strung on and then thrown away for a glass of vodka. Sentenced to death and in a cell of the Soviet prison in Berlin, told the whole story to another officer and engineer, Anikin. This Anikin himself had been both a German POW, had been in a German POW camp and on the verge of death in Buchenwald, and had been freed by the Americans, taken to the Soviet zone in Germany, and left there temporarily to assist in dismantling factories, and had run off to West Germany, and was engaged in building a hydroelectric power station near Munich. When he was kidnapped by the Soviet intelligence service, he was blinded with headlights and pushed into an automobile. And what was it all for? So we could hear the story of the Odessa mechanical engineer and preserve it for us, so as to attempt fruitlessly to escape from Averbakh twice, and which there will be more in part 5, and then be killed in the penalty lime factory. Now that is predestination. Those are the twists of fate, and how can we then discern the meaning of one individual human life? We have not yet described the group escapes, and there were many of them too. They say that in 1956, a whole small camp escaped from Montreal. The history of all the escapes from the archipelago would be a list too long to be read, too long to be leafed through, and any one person who wrote a book solely about escapes, to spare his reader and himself, would be forced to omit hundreds of cases. Thank you for listening. Good day.